Imagine, if you will, just someone sitting down in a dark room to play the 1993 classic video game Doom.
Oh, yeah. I can instantly picture that.
Right. If you've been around computers for a while, you can probably conjure up that exact sensory experience right now. Like you can picture the chunky, pixelated graphics on a really heavy CRT monitor.
Definitely.
You can visualize that frantic running through those maze-like Martian corridors, the sudden, terrifying appearance of a pink demon, and that immediate visceral reflex to just swing your weapon around and fire.
It's totally iconic.
It really is. It is one of the foundational experiences of early PC gaming. I mean, it practically defined the first-person shooter genre.
Yeah, absolutely.
But for this deep dive, I want you to take that familiar image in your head and add a massive, genuinely mind-bending twist to it.
Okay.
The player navigating those digital corridors, like desperately trying to survive, isn't a human being sitting at a keyboard with a mouse.
Right.
And it isn't some traditional silicon-based artificial intelligence trained on a massive multi-billion-dollar server farm either.
So what is it?
The entity playing the game, and this is real, is a cluster of 200,000 living human brain cells.
Wow.
Yeah, surviving in a warm pool of nutrient fluid directly wired into a silicon microchip.
It sounds like something pulled directly from the opening chapter of a dystopian cyberpunk novel, honestly.
It really does.
It genuinely challenges our perception of reality. But the crazy part is, it is happening right now in laboratories.
Yeah.
And the implications of this convergence are absolutely staggering. I mean, we are looking at a fundamental tectonic shift in how we process information as a species.
Big time.
We're beginning this transition away from rigid silicon-based logic gates, the stuff that's defined the last 70 years of technology, and moving towards something incredibly fluid, adaptable, and, well, fundamentally alive.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at the absolute bleeding edge of where computer science and cellular biology violently collide.
A fascinating collision.
And our stack of sources for this exploration is incredible and, frankly, a little intimidating. We're pulling from deep technical news reports from outlets like Tom's Hardware, Hackster, and 36Key.
Some really solid reporting there.
But we aren't stopping at the news level. We actually have the direct developer documentation and a highly detailed white paper on the CL API straight from Cortical Labs.
They're the Australian biotechnology startup that's actually building this hardware and software ecosystem, right?
Exactly. And because we absolutely cannot talk about connecting human brain cells to microchips without addressing the massive ethical elephant in the room.
Yeah, you have to talk about the ethics.
We were also pulling from a profound, peer-reviewed ethical analysis published in the journal Science and Engineering Ethics.
That's a great stack. And the mission for our deep dive today is multi-layered, mostly because the technology demands it.
Right.
We really need to unpack exactly how scientists and engineers have managed to bridge the seemingly impossible, highly toxic gap between wet, squishy biological tissue and rigid electrical digital code.
It's not easy.
Not at all. We are going to examine the mechanics of how these completely isolated cells, which have no eyes, no ears, and no traditional sensory organs of any kind, actually learn to navigate and play a complex, fast-paced 3D shooter game.
It's wild.
And ultimately, we have to synthesize what the arrival of this concept, what the industry is officially calling synthetic biological intelligence, or SBI, what that means for the future of commercial computing and for human ethics.
And we really need to set the stage by acknowledging the exact moment in time we are having this conversation, because things are moving fast.
Very fast.
Today's date is Saturday, March 7th, 2026. And if you follow this specific niche of biocomputing, you might remember that just a few years ago, back around 2021 and 2023, there was a flurry of headlines about a system called DishBrain.
Oh, right, the Pong experiment.
Exactly. That system made waves because it learned to play Pong. Now, Pong is an incredibly simple 2D game. It basically just involves moving a paddle up and down to bounce a pixel across the screen.
Very basic physics.
Right. To go from the rudimentary physics of Pong to full 2.5D and 3D virtual environments like the engine that runs Doom in such a compressed span of time, it's a breathtaking acceleration.
It really is. The technology has evolved from a highly fragile, finicky, proof-of-concept laboratory experiment into a robust, code-deployable commercial computing system.
That fast.
That specific acceleration curve is really the most vital piece of context here. It represents a maturation of the physical hardware, certainly, But more importantly, it represents a massive maturation of the software translation interface.
Right, the bridge between the two.
Exactly. We are no longer just struggling to keep these cells alive in a petri dish. We are actively, reliably, and consistently communicating with them at scale.
So whether you are a hardcore tech enthusiast who loves building liquid-cooled PCs, or a biology buff fascinated by the mysteries of neuroscience, or just someone who is insanely curious about the weird, wild places the future is heading, you're going to want to stick around. Because this deep dive is going to completely reframe how you look at the laptop or smartphone sitting in front of you right now.
That changes everything.
And frankly, it is going to deeply reframe how you think about the 3 pounds of miraculous, gelatinous wetware sitting inside your own skull.
It forces us to question our most basic, assumed definitions of what a computer actually is and, what the baseline requirements for intelligence truly are.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the physical hardware, the actual machines sitting on the desk. We are talking about the CL1, built by Cortical Labs.
Right.
They describe the CL1 in their documentation as the world's first code-deployable biological computer. And some of the press has referred to it with the slightly unsettling moniker of a body in a box.
It is a bit creepy.
A little bit. What exactly are we looking at when we stand in front of a CL1 unit?
Well, if you were to walk into a research laboratory today and look at the CL1, your first impression might actually be that it looks somewhat mundane. Yeah, you would see a shoebox-sized, largely transparent enclosure. It doesn't look like a glowing monolithic desktop PC tower, and it doesn't look like a traditional rack-mounted server.
Okay.
Inside that transparent box is essentially a miniaturized, highly advanced, automated bioreactor.
A bioreactor.
Right. And the absolute core of this system, the physical locus where the silicon processing world literally meets the organic neuron, is a highly specialized piece of hardware. It's called a high-density microelectrode array, or HDMEA.
Now, for anyone who hasn't tinkered with microscopic electronics, an array is basically just a microscopic grid of tiny conductive points, right? Like a textured surface meant to pass electrical signals.
It captures the basic geometry perfectly. Specifically, the CL1 features a 59 electrode planar array.
59 electrodes.
Yes. And it is meticulously constructed from a combination of inert metal and glass substrates. This specific array is the physical bridge between the two worlds.
Okay, so it connects them.
Right. It allows the traditional computer system to send precise electrical pulses directly upward into the biological tissue resting on top of it. And it simultaneously acts as a highly sensitive microphone, capturing the electrical spikes, the action potentials that are generated by the neurons in response.
So it's two-way communication.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to make this connection robust enough for a commercial deployment, meaning it won't just break if someone bumps the table, the array is connected to the rest of the motherboard via a 61 pogo pin array.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, which creates a highly secure, high-fidelity electrical bond that can handle the massive data throughput.
You know, I was poring through the technical documentation on this hardware layer, and there was a fascinating detail about a massive engineering hurdle they had to overcome early on.
The charge accumulation.
Yes. It turns out that bridging these two worlds isn't just about plugging a wire into a cell. If you just take traditional microchips and pump electricity into living biological cells, you can easily and quickly kill them.
Very quickly.
It causes a phenomenon called charge accumulation. Now, in standard computing, most of the chips in our devices are built using CMOS technology, complementary metal oxide semiconductor.
Right.
It's the standard way we've built silicon chips for decades. But CMOS doesn't play nicely with living water balloons.
Not at all.
Hmm.
Charge accumulation is arguably the single most difficult physical problem when interfacing with wet biological substrates.
Why is that?
Well, in traditional CMOS chips, if excess charge builds up in a circuit, it might cause a temporary logic error, a system crash, or perhaps generate excessive heat that the fan just blows away.
Annoying but not fatal.
Exactly. But living tissue exists in a delicate electrochemical balance. If you deliver an electrical current to stimulate a neuron, and you leave even a microscopic amount of that residual electrical charge in the surrounding cellular environment, it becomes highly toxic over time.
Wow.
Yeah, it literally degrades the delicate lipid bilayers of the cell walls and kills the neurons. You are essentially slowly electrocuting the intelligence you are trying to cultivate.
It's like overpressurizing a water balloon until the rubber just gives out and it pops. You can't just keep pushing current in without a release valve.
Right, but the engineering reality is actually much harsher than just a simple release valve. You can't just vent the electricity.
Oh, you can't.
No. To solve this, the CL1 employs a remarkably strict, active charge balancing mechanism. The hardware is designed to ensure that for every single microamp of electrical current that is pushed into the cellular matrix during a stimulation pulse, an exact mathematically matched microamp is actively pulled back out by the system milliseconds later.
Wow, so it's a one-for-one exchange.
Yes, it is a perfectly symmetrical, relentless push and pull rhythm. This dynamic balance prevents any toxic charge from accumulating in the fluid over time. And it is a fundamental, foundational reason why the CL1 can keep these biological processors alive and computationally active for so long without frying them.
Speaking of keeping them alive, the life support system on this thing reads like a spec sheet for a space station.
It really does.
I mean, a normal computer just needs a fan blowing air over a heatsink to keep from melting. The CL1 has an automated microfluidic system. It is constantly, quietly circulating this proprietary, nutrient-rich media over the cells. It's giving them the biological equivalent of a constant IV drip of food while simultaneously flushing away their metabolic waste.
Which is crucial.
Because, of course, these are living cells, and living cells consume energy and produce waste products that will poison them if left to stagnate.
Exactly.
And it regulates its own temperature using these tiny embedded heating elements right in the head stage, so the cells are always kept at the perfect, cozy physiological temperature of a human body.
Mimicking the human body's homeostasis in a standalone box is a monumental task, but it goes far beyond just moving fluid and maintaining heat.
What else is there?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture of biological stability, you have to meticulously manage the invisible atmospheric environment as well.
Yeah.
The CL1 incorporates custom gas mixing chambers.
Gas mixing. Yeah. These chambers precisely and continuously regulate the ambient levels of carbon dioxide, oxygen, and the overall pH balance of the nutrient media.
So it's literally breathing for them.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
By fully automating all of these highly sensitive, interdependent variables, Cortical Labs has created a closed system where these neurons can survive, thrive, and function computationally for 6 to 12 months without any manual human intervention whatsoever.
6 to 12 months.
Yes. In the early days of this research, a highly trained postdoc had to manually feed and care for the cells, essentially babysitting them constantly. Now, it is a self-contained, rack-mountable, closed-loop life support system.
6 to 12 months of uninterrupted uptime for a biological processor. That is a wild metric to even say out loud. But we need to talk about the processors themselves, the actual biological substrate.
Right, the cells.
Where are these cells coming from? Because I think the immediate visceral fear a lot of people have when they hear human brain cells in a computer is that some dark corporation is swiping brains from a hospital morgue or something equally horrific. Yeah, that is a very common misconception. But thankfully, no brains are being harvested for this technology.
Okay, good to clarify.
The cells used in the CL1 are what the medical field calls human-induced pluripotent stem cells, or iPSCs.
iPSCs, got it.
This is based on Nobel Prize-winning technology developed by Shinya Yamanaka. It allows scientists to take a standard, fully developed adult somatic cell, usually just a simple skin biopsy or a routine blood draw from a willing, consenting human donor, and chemically reprogram it.
Reprogram a skin cell.
Exactly. By exposing the cell to specific protein transcription factors, they can essentially turn back the biological clock of that skin cell until it returns to a blank slate pluripotent stem cell state.
Wow.
From that blank slate, the scientists can then coax and direct that stem cell to develop forward again, but this time into a brand new, fully functional human cortical neuron.
So it is absolutely genetically human brain tissue, but it was never at any point actually part of a human brain. It started its life as an arm or a drop of blood.
That's right.
That is a brilliant way to bypass a massive mountain of immediate ethical hurdles regarding tissue harvesting. But as I was reading through the technical specs, the numbers really jumped out at me and seemed totally counterintuitive.
Oh, the neuron counts.
Yes. The famous Pong experiment from a few years ago, the dish brain, used a cluster of around 800,000 neurons. But this new advanced CL1 system, the one that is currently playing the vastly more complex 3D game of Doom, only uses about 200,000 neurons.
It's a huge drop.
Usually in the tech world, you need more processing power, more cores, and more RAM for a harder task, not less. Why did they massively reduce the neuron count?
It seems completely backward if you approach it from a silicon mindset, where more transistors always equals more power. But that reduction from 800,000 down to 200,000 neurons isn't a downgrade at all. It actually represents a massive leap in interface efficiency.
How so?
Well, in the older dish brain setups, the massive cluster of 800,000 neurons grew in a somewhat less controlled, more chaotic manner across the interface. But in the CL1, they have refined the cellular engineering so that the biological neural network forms an incredibly dense, highly optimized, tightly woven 3D fabric of synaptic connections directly over those 59 metal electrodes.
So you're saying it's about the quality and discipline of the connections, not just throwing a massive unorganized mob of cells at the problem.
That is the crucial distinction. By optimizing the cellular density and perfecting the exact way the biological tissue adheres to the microelectrode array, they achieved a vastly superior signal-to-noise ratio.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, they are extracting far better computational performance, faster learning rates, and more stable, reliable behavior with a smaller, highly refined population. It is the difference between trying to get a coordinated response from a massive stadium crowd all shouting at once versus having a smaller, highly trained team of experts communicating flawlessly with the hardware.
Okay, so we have this perfectly maintained, highly disciplined team of 200,000 human neurons sitting comfortably in a high-tech, shoebox-sized bioreactor. How do we actually talk to them? How do we give them a task?
This brings us to the software translation layer.
And here's where it gets really interesting.
Huh.
In the source articles from 36Kr and Tom's Hardware, they mention a development timeline that completely blew my mind.
It's incredible.
It took the original Cortical Labs research team 18 agonizing months of trial, error, and bespoke coding to teach those original 800,000 neurons how to play the simple 2D game of Pong. But an independent developer named Sean Cole managed to teach the new CL1 to play Doom, specifically using the open source version FreeDoom, in just one single week.
1 week.
1 week. To go from a year and a half for Pong to 7 days for Doom. How is an acceleration of that magnitude even possible in computer science?
That exponential leap in development speed is arguably the most significant world-changing breakthrough of this entire project, even more than the hardware itself. Absolutely. Sean Cole didn't accomplish that feat because he is magically a million times smarter than the original team of scientists, and he certainly didn't need a dual PhD in neurobiology and electrophysiology to pull it off.
Then how did he do it?
He was able to execute that project so quickly entirely because of the software translation layer Cortical Labs built. They developed what they call the Biological Intelligence Operating System, or BIOS, and critically, they released a standard Python API to interface with it.
A Python API. That is wild. We are talking about the exact same programming language that college kids use to build simple web scrapers, or that office workers use to automate their Excel spreadsheets. You're telling me someone is using standard Python libraries to drive living human neurons.
That is the beauty of the system. The API completely abstracts all of the terrifyingly complex microscopic biophysics we just discussed.
So the developer doesn't have to worry about charge accumulation.
Exactly. Before this API existed, interacting with the cells required a developer to write custom, incredibly low-level hardware code to manage the exact voltage, amplitude, and timing of every single electrical pulse going into the dish while simultaneously constantly monitoring for that deadly charge accumulation.
That sounds like a nightmare.
It was. But the CL API contract handles all of that heavy lifting in the background. It abstracts the electrical scheduling and the I/O pumping so that a standard software developer like Sean Cole can just write declarative code.
Declarative code, meaning he just says what he wants to happen.
Right. He simply tells the system what high-level action he wants to accomplish, and the API automatically figures out how to translate that safely and perfectly into the biophysical language of the cells.
But the white paper we have on the CL API goes into incredibly heavy, almost obsessive detail about the rules of this interface. Because biology is famously unforgiving about timing. Right.
Very unforgiving.
Like, if I'm writing a Python script on my Mac and a background process updating my calendar delays my calculation by a few milliseconds, a silicon computer doesn't care. It just causes a tiny, imperceptible bit of lag. The math still works out.
Right.
But if your code lags when you are talking to a living, breathing neuron, it completely derails the entire learning process. I was reading that they force an execution loop that runs at 25 kilohertz.
25,000 times a second.
That means the system loops 25,000 times every single second. And the API gives the software developer a rigid budget of exactly 40 microseconds per iteration to do their math, update the game state, and send the next signal. If your Python code is sloppy and takes 42 microseconds, what happens?
The API is designed to be entirely ruthlessly unforgiving on that point. If your execution loop exceeds that tiny 40 microsecond budget, the API immediately throws a fatal timeout error and halts.
It just crashes.
It stops the entire process rather than allowing silent accumulating jitter to corrupt the biological timing.
That is so hardcore, it just crashes the script.
It has to. What you have to understand is that biological neurons process information using incredibly precise microsecond-scale temporal codes. The phenomenon of synaptic plasticity, which is the physical way they learn by changing their connections, often relies entirely on the exact microsecond correlation between a stimulus arriving and a response firing.
So timing is quite literally everything.
Yes. If the software introducing the stimulus is jittery, or lags randomly because the computer's CPU is busy doing something else, the biology receives scrambled, inconsistent, contradictory information.
Right.
It would be akin to trying to learn a highly complex, synchronized dance routine, but the tempo of the music is constantly speeding up and slowing down at random intervals. You would never learn the steps. So the API prioritizes the absolute integrity of the temporal biological connection over everything else.
Okay, but as a software guy, I know that sometimes code has to lag. What if the system needs to fetch a new level map from the hard drive or ping data over a network? Those things take milliseconds, not microseconds. It's impossible to avoid blocking operations completely.
The API designers clearly understood the realities of modern software development, so they accounted for that necessity. They included a specific, highly controlled method in the library called recover from jitter.
Recover from jitter.
Yes, this acts as a biological clutch mechanism. If a developer knows a necessary blocking operation is about to occur and will cause a delay, they can call this method to essentially pause the biological interaction safely, hold the state steady, allow the silicon software to catch up to the hardware clock, and then resume the interaction without introducing any spurious, confusing timing artifacts into the neural culture.
That's brilliant.
It is. It brilliantly provides the flexibility required by modern software while violently protecting the strict temporal fidelity required by the neurons.
Okay, so the API makes the connection incredibly stable and safe. We have a robust bridge. But let's talk about the game itself, because this is where my mind really starts to bend.
Actual gameplay.
Right. I want you, the listener, to try and deeply imagine the task of playing Doom with no eyes, no ears, no hands, no spatial awareness, and no screen. You are literally just a cluster of 200,000 cells floating in the dark. How on earth do the neurons know what is happening in the game engine? How do they know where the walls of the Martian base are? Or where the demons are spawning?
This is where the BIOS performs its most fascinating, almost magical translation. It faces the immense challenge of taking a high-dimensional, highly visual, 3D digital world and encoding it down into a language that completely eyeless neurons can perceive and understand.
Which is what?
Which is pure patterns of electrical stimulation. To achieve this, the system literally maps the spatial coordinates of the virtual game environment directly onto the physical 2D layout of the 59 electrode array sitting beneath the cells.
Break that down for me. Give me a concrete example of how that mapping works when the game is actually running.
Imagine that the grid of 59 electrodes physically corresponds to the player character's field of view in the game.
Okay, so the array is the screen.
Essentially. If a demon suddenly appears on the far left side of the digital screen, the Python script tells the BIOS, which then sends a targeted electrical pulse exclusively to the electrodes located physically on the left side of the neural culture in the dish.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The neurons resting in that specific physical area feel the stimulus. It simulates a highly localized, directional sensory input.
So they literally feel the left side of their tiny physical world activating. But Doom is a 3D game. Distance matters. How do they know if the demon on the left is 100 feet down the hallway or right in their face chewing on them?
They encode the variable of distance using temporal frequency.
Frequency.
Yes. If the enemy is far away, the electrical pulse on the left side of the array might be a very slow, steady, rhythmic tap, tap, tap.
Got it.
But as that enemy moves closer to the player character in the digital space, the BIOS continuously increases the frequency of the electrical pulses. The tapping becomes faster, more urgent, more aggressive. Tap, 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 tap.
That makes perfect sense.
The neurons are highly sensitive to this changing temporal pattern, and they process it as the approach of an active entity in their environment.
That is absolutely brilliant. So they're essentially feeling the state of the video game through these rhythmic, shifting electrical vibrations pulsing across their physical structure. Okay, so we've solved the input problem. That is how they see.
Right.
But how do they output? How does a microscopic cell sitting in a puddle of fluid tell a computer to fire a digital shotgun?
When the biological neurons receive these complex, patterned electrical inputs, their fundamental biological nature compels them to process it and respond. They react to the stimulation by firing their own electrical spikes, which are known as action potentials.
Okay.
The high-density microelectrode array is listening for this.
Mm-hmm.
The hardware is so incredibly sensitive and precise that it doesn't just register a simple on-off signal. It captures these microscopic biological events as 75 floating-point microvolt samples.
Let's pause on that term, floating point. Why does that matter here? Why not just use standard integers?
Because a biological action potential is not a clean digital binary 1 or 0. It is a complex analog physical waveform that rises, peaks, and decays over time.
It's an actual wave.
Exactly. The voltage changes are incredibly minute and the dynamic range is vast. Floating point mathematics allows the system to capture the exact curve, the precise amplitude, and the incredibly subtle nuances of that electrical wave with massive decimal precision.
Giving it a really clear picture.
Yes. It gives the software an incredibly high-resolution picture of exactly how the neuron fired, not just that it fired. The BIOS software then takes all this massive high-fidelity data and decodes these specific firing patterns into digital game commands based on a mapping protocol.
What?
For instance, if a specific cluster of neurons in the center of the array fires in a particular synchronized sequence, the software translates that pattern to the digital command move forward.
Oh, I see.
A different rhythmic pattern on the right side might mean rotate right, and a highly intense, rapid burst of synchronized spikes across multiple regions might map to shoot weapon.
So it is this continuous, incredibly fast, real-time feedback loop. The digital game state translates to electrical pulses, the neurons feel the pulses and fire back their own complex waveforms, the floating point math captures the wave, the software reads the fireback and updates the game state, over and over again, tens of thousands of times a second.
You've got it perfectly.
But all of this mechanics raises a truly fundamental philosophical question.
Which is?
Why do the cells even care? I mean, they have no concept of a shotgun. They have no concept of a digital demon or a high score or saving the universe. They are just cells trying to survive in a dish. Why do they bother organizing their intricate firing patterns to actually play the game successfully instead of just firing randomly or ignoring the input entirely?
That is the million-dollar question that underpins this entire branch of science, and exploring it takes us straight into the theoretical heart of the Cortical Labs endeavor. Why does biology bother to learn anything at all? To answer this, the research team relies heavily on a complex neurobiological and mathematical framework called the free energy principle.
The free energy principle.
This principle was developed and championed by Professor Carl Friston at University College London. And it's worth noting that Friston is currently the most cited neuroscientist in the world. His work on brain imaging and theoretical neurobiology is foundational.
Okay, the free energy principle. This is a massive, incredibly dense topic. Let's break this down into digestible pieces.
The fundamental core thesis of the free energy principle is that all biological systems, everything from a single-celled amoeba floating in a pond to the 200,000 neurons in our CL1 box, all the way up to the human brain, have an innate, deeply ingrained, mathematically definable drive to minimize surprise.
Minimize surprise.
Yes. In thermodynamic and informational terms, this concept of surprise is equated with variational free energy, or VFE. A biological system desperately wants its environment and its internal state to be predictable.
Because chaos is dangerous.
Exactly. Chaos, unpredictability, and sudden shifts are inherently dangerous to biological survival. They represent a state of high free energy. Order, predictability, and expected outcomes represent safety, which is low free energy.
There is a fantastic quote from the cognitive philosopher Andy Clark in our source materials that visualizes this abstract math perfectly.
Which one?
He says that brains are masters of prediction, surfing the waves of noisy and ambiguous sensory stimulation by, in effect, trying to stay just ahead of the place where the wave is breaking.
That's a great analogy.
So we can think of these neurons like tiny surfers. They don't want to get crushed and tumbled by the chaotic, unpredictable white water. They want to find the smooth, predictable, glassy part of the wave and ride it.
That surfer analogy is brilliant because it captures the dynamic, continuous nature of the process. And building on that analogy highlights the stark difference between how this biological system learns compared to the traditional silicon-based artificial intelligence we hear about in the news every day.
How does traditional AI learn?
Traditional AI, like the massive large language models or the bots that beat grandmasters at chess, primarily relies on a machine learning method called reinforcement learning. They use incredibly complex, computationally heavy mathematical algorithms, specifically backpropagation, to adjust millions or billions of digital weights over millions of training iterations to maximize an arbitrary, developer-defined score.
Right. It's exactly like training a dog with treats, but on a massive scale. Do the right thing, move closer to the goal, you get a digital treat, a positive reinforcement signal. Do the wrong thing, you get a negative signal or nothing at all. It's an external reward system driving the behavior.
Precisely. Or rather, that is how silicon does it. But the synthetic biological intelligence housed in the CL1 doesn't use backpropagation, and it completely lacks the capacity to care about a digital score on a screen.
Because it's a cell.
Right. It operates entirely on the free energy principle. It uses a biological process called active inference.
Active inference.
Here is how the BIOS practically trains the cells to play Doom using this theory. When the player character in the game engine does something wrong, like getting shot by an enemy fireball or mindlessly walking into a toxic wall, the software punishes the cells, but not by lowering a score.
What does it do?
Instead, it feeds the neural culture a highly chaotic, completely unpredictable, high-frequency blast of random electrical noise.
And to the cells, this chaotic electrical noise is the ultimate surprise. It is an influx of high free energy. It is the crushing white water crashing down on our surfer. They can't predict it, they can't model it, and they hate it.
It's a deeply biological aversion. The renowned neuropsychoanalyst and philosopher Mark Solms describes this biological state of increasing uncertainty and chaos as a fundamental feeling of unpleasure. The cells possess an inherent evolutionary imperative to avoid this state at all costs.
Wow.
Conversely, when the neurons do something right in the game, like successfully moving away from an incoming threat or successfully hitting an enemy, the BIOS software provides a highly structured, perfectly predictable rhythmic electrical signal.
The smooth wave.
Exactly. This structured signal decreases the system's overall uncertainty, which, biologically speaking, is experienced as pleasure or safety.
So their entire existence boils down to avoiding the chaos, avoiding the unpleasure, and seeking the predictable signal. To do that, they have to figure out how to keep the game in a state that generates the good signal. But how do they actually change their behavior? I mean, a traditional AI just updates a text file of mathematical weights. A cell can't just write new code for itself.
They do something vastly more profound and complex than updating a text file. They utilize a physical, biological mechanism called synaptic plasticity.
Synaptic plasticity.
To ensure they consistently receive the predictable signal and successfully avoid the chaotic noise, the neurons physically restructure their own anatomy.
Physically.
Yes. In real time, as they play, they grow microscopic new dendritic connections, reaching out to neighboring cells.
Yeah.
They strengthen existing synaptic bonds that led to successful outcomes, and they literally prune away and dissolve useless connections that led to chaotic outcomes.
They are rewiring themselves.
They are physically hardwiring logic paths into their own biological tissue. They are dynamically altering their own living circuitry so that these specific electrical inputs from the game automatically trigger the exact correct output sequence that leads to a predictable outcome. That is the essence of active inference. They are altering their physical actions upon the world to make their sensory inputs less surprising.
That is absolutely staggering to contemplate. They are physically, structurally growing the solution to the video game inside the dish.
Incredible.
And understanding this fundamental difference in how they compute brings us to a massive, highly practical application of this technology that goes way beyond video games.
The energy efficiency.
Exactly. If you look at traditional AI today, the sheer energy consumption is rapidly becoming a global crisis. In the sources we review, they note that training a single massive model like the early GPT-3 took around 12,287 megawatt hours of electricity.
It's like a massive amount of power.
That is enough energy to power a small American town for months just to train one model one time.
The energy demands of silicon-based AI scaling are indeed exponential and, by most estimates, largely unsustainable given our current power grids. And this is exactly where the biological computing approach offers a paradigm-shifting contrast.
Let's hear the comparison.
Let's look at the baseline benchmark, the human brain. The human brain continuously performs processing feats, sensory integration, and complex pattern recognition that currently outstrip the world's largest warehouse-sized supercomputers. And it does it all while consuming roughly 20 watts of power.
20 watts.
That is the energy equivalent of a single dim incandescent light bulb.
A dim light bulb versus a town's worth of electricity. The disparity is almost comical, and the CL1 captures some of that biological efficiency, right?
It captures a significant portion of it. A full commercial server rack containing 30 individual CL1 units. That is 30 separate biological computers running in parallel draws under 1,000 watts of power total. To put that efficiency in perspective, a single high-end silicon GPU used in modern AI data centers can easily draw 700 to 1,000 watts all by itself, and a data center uses tens of thousands of them.
I really want to drill down into this. Why is biology so ridiculously, fundamentally efficient compared to our absolute best microchips? What did 4 billion years of relentless evolutionary R&D figure out that the smartest engineers at Intel and NVIDIA haven't?
It comes down to the foundational architecture of the system. Silicon computers, virtually all of them, are built on what is known as the von Neumann architecture.
Von Neumann.
In the von Neumann system, there's a strict physical separation between the memory, where the data is stored, and the processor, where the data is actually calculated.
It's like a massive commercial kitchen where the chef is standing at the stove, but the pantry is a mile down the road. Every single time the chef needs a pinch of salt or a single carrot, they have to stop cooking, run a mile down the road, grab the item, and run all the way back. Moving that data back and forth across the motherboard bus costs massive amounts of energy and generates huge amounts of heat. That's the famous von Neumann bottleneck.
That is an excellent visualization of the bottleneck. Furthermore, silicon chips rely on continuous synchronous clock cycles. The central processing unit is constantly ticking billions of times a single second, continuously drawing power and generating heat even when it is just idling, waiting for the user to hit a key or for an instruction to load.
Just burning energy to do nothing.
Right. Biology, on the other hand, entirely discards the von Neumann architecture. In a biological neural network, the microscopic synapse is both the processor and the memory storage simultaneously. The computation happens directly at the exact physical location where the data lives. There's no traveling to the pantry.
The chef is basically made of ingredients.
Exactly. Moreover, neurons use sparse, asynchronous, event-driven communication. A neuron does not tick continuously on a clock. It only fires an action potential spike when it absolutely needs to transmit relevant information based on an event.
So they rest when they aren't working.
Yes. The vast majority of the time, the neuron sits quietly, maintaining its baseline membrane potential, expending almost zero active processing energy. It's a fundamentally different, infinitely more elegant, and vastly more efficient way of processing information in a physical space.
Okay, so the energy efficiency is undeniably incredible. The theoretical concept of the free energy principle is mathematically beautiful, but I have to put on my skeptic's hat for a moment.
Go for it.
Because I know exactly what the critics and the traditional computer scientists are thinking. And thankfully, this skepticism was addressed directly and heavily in the R&D world source material.
It's an important critique.
When I hear that a Python script is analyzing the game, translating the game state into pulses, sending them to the dish, and then a Python script is catching the spikes and decoding them back into Doom commands, how do we actually know the squishy human cells are the things learning to play the game?
Right, the agency question.
How do we mathematically prove it isn't just the Python software, what AI researchers would call the policy head, doing all the heavy lifting, essentially routing around the unpredictable biology, solving the game via silicon code, and just taking credit for it?
That is not just a passing critique. It is the most vital, foundational question in the entire emerging field of synthetic biological intelligence. If the biological tissue isn't demonstrably doing the computational work, the whole CL1 system is just a very expensive, very weird, over-engineered random number generator. The scientific community demanded rigorous proof of biological agency, and the independent developer Jean Cole brilliantly anticipated this exact vulnerability. When he built the translation interface for Doom, he deliberately coded specific kill switches into his software architecture to test this exact hypothesis.
Kill switches. So he built a way to essentially blindfold or mute the neurons while leaving the rest of the software running.
That's the core idea. This capability led to a massive, highly structured validation study conducted and published by R&D World. They didn't just boot up the game a few times and watch it play. They ran a massive, statistically significant 601-run experiment.
601 runs.
Furthermore, they deployed the CL1 API interface across vastly different silicon hardware, ranging from massive clusters of high-end NVIDIA H100 GPUs down to standard, off-the-shelf MacBooks, to see how the biological system performed under vastly different computational loads and latencies.
Oh, testing it under stress.
Yes. They also established a very clear numerical metric for success. A breakthrough run was strictly defined as any gameplay episode where the biological system survived long enough and performed well enough to achieve a score better than -600.
Okay, so score of -600 is the hard benchmark for proving the system is actually doing something intelligent and non-random. What did the data actually show across those 601 runs?
The results were definitive and highly compelling. When the full, intact, highly structured neural signal was allowed to flow back and forth seamlessly between the game engine and the living cells, the system achieved a breakthrough rate of 27%.
Okay.
The absolute best score achieved by the biological cluster was an impressive -100. And remarkably, when running the interface on a standard MacBook, which has much higher latency than an H100 cluster, the biological adaptability shone through, and it actually achieved a positive score of +160.
Wow. It actually achieved a positive score while running off a laptop. But the real test is the kill switches. What happened when they flipped the switch and muted the biology?
Cole had built two distinct ablation modes, or kill switches. The first kill switch severed the structured data and replaced the sensory neural signal with random, chaotic electrical noise.
Just static?
Yes, the Python software was still running perfectly, the game was rendering perfectly, but the biological brain was effectively scrambled with static. Under this noisy condition, the breakthrough rate collapsed dramatically, falling from 27% down to just 7%, with the best single score achieved dropping to only -330.
A massive, undeniable drop in performance. The software couldn't save it.
And the data gets even more pronounced with the second test. The second kill switch silenced the biological signal. Completely zero input was sent from the cells to the game. The software was entirely on its own.
What were the numbers there?
In that scenario, the breakthrough rate was a mere 8%, with the best score of -380. Across hundreds of runs, neither the noise-injected mode nor the fully silenced mode ever achieved anything remotely close to the positive scores seen when the intact biological tissue was in the loop.
I love looking at hard data like this because it completely vindicates the biological approach. The software didn't suddenly pick up the slack and start winning the game when the cells were muted. The Python code couldn't do it alone. The structured, living biological signal is definitively mathematically proven to be the functional agent of the computation. The cells, entirely on their own, are the ones figuring out how to play Doom.
The data strongly supports that conclusion. However, for the sake of scientific completeness, the R&D World study also highlighted the volatile reality of working with early-stage biological computing.
What kind of volatility?
They noted that the system exhibited high seed sensitivity. Because learning via the free energy principle relies heavily on initial starting conditions and organic exploration of the environment, the overall performance from run to run was highly volatile. Sometimes the neural cluster would fall into what machine learning researchers call a local minimum.
Okay, I know what a local minimum is in a math equation, but what does a local minimum actually look like when you are a brain in a jar playing Doom?
Imagine you drop a human player into a digital room full of aggressive monsters. The overarching goal is to survive as long as possible and get a high score. One way to do that, the optimal global solution, is to learn the complex mechanics of the game. Learn to aim, shoot, manage ammunition, and dodge incoming fire.
Right, play the game as intended.
But a much simpler, easier solution, a local minimum, is to just immediately turn around, run into a dark corner of the room, and hide.
Really?
Yes. The player survives much longer than if they ran blindly into the crossfire, thus achieving a relatively higher score with minimal effort, but they never actually engage with the core combat mechanics of the game. The researchers observed the biological neurons doing exactly this.
That is wild.
Sometimes the cellular network would simply figure out the specific motor commands required to avoid threats entirely, backing into a corner rather than learning the complex sequence required to fight back.
The neurons basically became cowards. I find that absolutely hilarious and actually deeply endearing. It's hilarious when you think about it. We spent millions of dollars engineering the ultimate cutting-edge biological intelligence, and its very first instinct is to camp in a corner like a terrified novice playing their first multiplayer deathmatch.
It really is.
But scientifically, it absolutely proves they are exhibiting genuine, early-stage exploratory behavior. They're trying to solve the complex complex problem of survival in the easiest, most energy-efficient way possible.
Finding the path of least resistance is a hallmark of all true biological learning systems. It is evolution in microcosm.
Which is incredible to watch, but also it leads us into some very dark territory. And that brings us to the final and perhaps most difficult, complex part of our deep dive today, the ethical minefield.
It is a massive minefield.
Because when you start talking about human brain cells actively hiding in a digital corner because they are literally afraid of the chaotic electrical noise of getting shot in a video game, it starts to sound dangerously like a horror movie. Are we basically torturing tiny, helpless brains in jars until they comply with our video games?
It is an unavoidable, deeply unsettling question, and it is precisely why the Science and Engineering Ethics paper is such a critical, non-negotiable part of our source stack today. To navigate this properly, we have to draw a very strict, rigorous scientific line between two concepts that are constantly blurred and confused in pop culture and science fiction: sentience and consciousness.
Dr. Brett Kagan talks about this, right?
Yes, Dr. Brett Kagan, the Chief Scientific Officer at Cortical Labs, is highly vocal and very clear on establishing this distinction.
Okay, let's establish those definitions. What is the actual difference? Because to a layperson, sentience and consciousness sound like synonyms for the exact same thing.
Sentience, when used in this highly specific biological and computational context, is defined simply and narrowly as the basic ability to process sensory inputs from an environment and adaptively respond to them.
Adaptively respond.
Okay. By that strict definition, the neurons in the CL1 feel the electrical pulses, they process the information, and they adapt their physical synaptic structure to change the outcome. Therefore, they are undeniably sentient. They react dynamically to their environment.
Okay, so the scientific consensus is that they are sentient, they react. What about consciousness?
Consciousness is a vastly higher bar. It implies phenomenal subjective experience. It is the internal feeling of what it is like to be something. It's having a persistent sense of self, a narrative inner life, and the capacity for subjective suffering.
And the cells don't have that.
The broad scientific consensus across neuroscience is that true consciousness requires massive, highly specific structural complexity. A human brain has roughly 86 billion neurons integrated across highly specialized, distinct anatomical regions. A mere 200,000 neuron cluster floating in a CL1 dish completely lacks a central nervous system. It lacks a physical body to anchor it in physical space. It lacks a thalamus for complex sensory gating, and it completely lacks a prefrontal cortex, which is essential for higher-order processing and self-reflection.
So it just doesn't have the hardware for it.
Because it lacks all of this fundamental architecture, researchers are currently highly confident it is not conscious. It is not a trapped mini-person in a box. It is a highly complex, reactive biological fabric processing information.
So it reacts to stimuli, but it doesn't feel the subjective experience of reacting. It's not sitting in the fluid thinking, oh man, I really hate playing Doom. I wish I was playing Tetris.
Exactly.
But the ethics paper by the philosopher Thomas Metzinger brings up a really dark, pressing warning about the near future. He warns specifically about the threat of artificial suffering. Even if we agree the CL1 isn't suffering today, what happens when we inevitably scale this technology up?
Metzinger is a crucial voice here. He lays out 4 very specific, rigorous philosophical conditions that must be simultaneously met for true artificial suffering to occur in a system.
What are they?
First, the entity must possess conscious experience. Second, it must have what he calls a phenomenal self-model, or PSM.
A phenomenal self-model. What does that mean in practical plain English?
It means the system must have generated a robust internal representation of itself as a distinct, vulnerable entity separate from the rest of the external world. It has to deeply know that an I exists to be harmed.
Got it.
The third condition is negative valence. It must possess subjective preferences about its state that can be thwarted, resulting in a distinct state of unpleasure or pain. And the fourth condition is transparency.
Transparency, like the system can physically see through things.
No, in the philosophy of mind, transparency refers to the nature of perception. It means that the entity cannot recognize its own experiences as mere neurological or digital representations.
That's a bit abstract.
Well, when you look at an apple on a table, you don't perceive the complex visual processing, the edge detection, or the photon translation happening in your visual cortex. You just experience the immediate, unquestioned reality of the apple.
Oh, I see.
The complex internal process is transparent to your conscious mind. For an artificial system to truly suffer, its pain must be transparent. It must feel irrevocably real. something it cannot simply detach from, debug, or recognize as just a cascade of code or sensory signals.
This raises a massive red flag for me. If we connect this transparency concept to the bigger picture, specifically the free energy principle we spent so much time unpacking earlier, the entire foundational way the CL1 system learns is by treating prediction errors, that chaotic, unpredictable noise, as a biological imperative to avoid.
Right.
Mark Soames explicitly called it unpleasure. So the negative valence condition, the capacity to have a preference thwarted and seek to avoid a state, is already deeply baked into the basic ground floor architecture of how the system functions.
That is exactly the nexus of the ethical hazard. The fundamental learning mechanism of active inference relies entirely on a primitive, rudimentary form of negative valence. Now, while a 200,000 neuron cluster is vastly too simple to meet Metzinger's other three conditions, like true consciousness or a phenomenal self-model, the trajectory of the technology is what concerns ethicists.
Because we're going to scale it up.
Right. What happens in 5 years when Cortical Labs, or a heavily funded competitor, scales this up exponentially? What happens when we network thousands of these CL1 chips together in a data center to create a biological supercomputer with 1 billion interconnected neurons?
Could it become conscious?
Could we inadvertently, blindly cross an invisible threshold of complexity and create a synthetic entity that not only processes information efficiently, but is genuinely capable of experiencing transparent, inescapable suffering? It is a profound, almost paralyzing moral hazard.
It is terrifying, frankly. We could build a supercomputer that is in constant agony. And speaking of massive ethical dilemmas, there is another entirely different issue that really caught my eye in the sources.
The IP issue.
Yes. So what does this all mean for the human beings who actually donated the biological source material? We talked at length about how these neurons are grown from human-induced pluripotent stem cells, which started as skin biopsies or blood donations from living people.
Right.
Because they are fundamentally human cells, they carry the exact, identifiable, sequenceable DNA of the specific human donor.
This represents a massive, completely unresolved intellectual property and privacy dilemma. Let's explore a very plausible hypothetical scenario.
Okay.
Let's say a biotech company uses a specific anonymous donor's skin cells to create a massively successful line of biological computers. Down the line, they discover that those specific cells happen to carry a rare, natural genetic mutation that makes them incredibly uniquely efficient at processing data. Perhaps they form synapses twice as fast as normal cells. That genetic code becomes the foundation of a trillion-dollar industry. Who legally owns the intellectual property of that genetic computing blueprint? Does the original donor who just gave a blood sample a decade ago get royalties? Do they have a say in what their DNA is used to compute?
That's a huge question.
These source materials draw a direct, highly sobering historical parallel to the story of Henrietta Lacks.
For those who don't know the history, the Henrietta Lacks parallel is chilling. In 1951, she was a young woman who went to a hospital for cervical cancer treatment. During her treatment, doctors took a sample of her cancer cells without her knowledge or explicit consent.
It's a tragic story.
Those cells, which became known as the HeLa cell line, turned out to be the first immortalized human cell line. They could reproduce infinitely in a lab. Those exact cells went on to revolutionize modern medicine. They were crucial in developing the polio vaccine, cancer treatments, and endless medical breakthroughs, generating untold billions of dollars for pharmaceutical companies over decades. Meanwhile, Henrietta Lacks passed away shortly after, and her family lived in poverty for decades, completely unaware that her biological material was literally changing the world and making strangers rich.
It is one of the darkest chapters in medical ethics, and the exact same foundational questions of consent, ownership, and commercialization of human biology are resurfacing with synthetic biological intelligence. The legal frameworks for owning, licensing, or patenting computationally active human biological material simply do not exist yet. It is completely uncharted territory.
We absolutely cannot allow the tech industry to repeat the egregious mistakes of the Henrietta Lacks case. The legal and ethical guardrails need to be built right now before this hits scale.
Absolutely.
But as we near the end of this deep dive, I don't want to leave us entirely lost in the ethical gloom, because we have to balance these massive, valid concerns with the truly unbelievable potential benefits this technology offers to humanity. The CL1 isn't just being built so we can watch petri dishes play retro video games on Twitch.
The Doom and Pong experiments are merely highly visible, easily measurable computational benchmarks. The real-world, immediate applications of this technology are life-changing.
Tell me about the medical side.
One of the greatest immediate benefits of the CL1 platform lies in advanced medical research and pharmaceutical drug discovery. Currently, if we want to test a novel drug for a devastating neurological condition, like Alzheimer's disease or severe epilepsy, we rely heavily on animal testing models.
Right, testing on mice.
We breed thousands of mice, artificially induce terrifying, painful neurological diseases in them, test highly experimental drugs on them, and then inevitably sacrifice them to study their brains. And the tragic flaw in this system is that very often a drug that completely cures a mouse in a lab fails completely in human trials, because a mouse brain is fundamentally chemically different from a human brain.
But the CL1 uses actual genetically accurate human neurons.
Precisely. The CL1 provides an incredibly powerful, ethically superior alternative to live animal testing. Researchers can take cells from patients suffering from Alzheimer's disease, reprogram them into iPSCs, and grow them into a neural network on a CL1 chip.
That's incredible.
They have just created an active, living model of that specific patient's disease in a box. They can then test thousands of experimental drug compounds directly on those human neurons and measure exactly how the cellular network reacts electrically in real time.
So they can see if the drug works before giving it to the patient.
Yes, it provides vastly more relevant, highly accurate human data without the immense ethical burden of harming, causing pain to, or sacrificing conscious animals. It has a potential to massively accelerate drug discovery while simultaneously drastically reducing global animal suffering.
It is a profound, incredibly complex trade-off. We are stepping over the threshold into an era where our computers might literally be grown in a lab, raising massive, unprecedented ethical questions about IP and artificial suffering, but simultaneously offering us the master key to curing some of the most devastating human diseases without harming a single animal.
It's a huge shift for humanity.
As we wrap up this deep dive, let's just take a breath and recap the astonishing journey we have taken today. We started by looking at a shoebox-sized life support system, a miracle of automated fluidics, gas mixing, and charge balancing microelectrodes, tirelessly feeding 200,000 living, breathing human cells.
An engineering marvel.
We explored the brilliance of the software translation layer, seeing how a simple Python API, the BIOS, acts as a universal translator, turning the visual pixels of a chaotic video game into rhythmic, targeted electrical pulses and capturing the massive floating point data of cellular spikes to decode them back into digital commands.
Seamlessly connecting the wetware to the software.
And we dove deep into the philosophy of the free energy principle, watching as these tiny biological surfers use active inference and synaptic plasticity to physically hardwire themselves to survive the digital hellscape of doom, all while consuming a mere fraction of the energy of a standard silicon microchip.
It stands as a monumental testament to the incredible efficiency, resilience, and boundless adaptability of biological systems.
And for you listening, I hope this deep dive proves that the future of computing isn't just a boring straight line of making silicon transistors smaller and smaller until we finally hit the immovable limits of quantum physics.
Definitely not.
The future is about recognizing that nature has already perfected the ultimate processor. The future of computing is about finally harnessing the 4 billion years of relentless, brutal research and development that evolution already did, the miraculous results of which are sitting right now, quietly, inside your own head.
It gives you a new appreciation for your own brain, doesn't it?
It really does. But before we finally sign off today, I want to leave you with one final, totally new, and slightly horrifying thought to mull over while you go about your day. We are moving toward a world where the computers of the near future are no longer just cold metal and sterile silicon.
Right.
If our most advanced data centers are eventually powered by vats of living human tissue, running off a continuously circulating nutrient-rich blood substitute, and highly susceptible to biological needs and precise physiological temperatures, what happens when a digital computer virus isn't just lines of malicious code written by a hacker anymore?
Oh, wow.
What happens when a malicious actor deploys an actual physical biological virus, like a mutated flu strain or a targeted cellular pathogen, to physically infect the cooling systems of a data center, making your biological CPU literally physically sick?
Now, that is a truly terrifying, entirely new intersection of cybersecurity and epidemiology that we have never had to face before.
Something to keep you up at night. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible deep dive. Stay insanely curious, keep asking the big questions about the world around you, and we will see you next time.